The third Sunday in Ordinary Time begins our actual journey through the Gospel of Matthew proper. And here we start with the beginning of Jesus' public ministry as recorded in that Gospel after his temptations in the desert. The reading is from Matthew chapter 4, verse 12 through 23. It's a long reading, but it's extremely important. So follow along with me. We'll read it, we'll ask some questions, and then we'll use the Old Testament to unpack it. This is a very important text. So, chapter 4, verse 12 says this. Now when Jesus heard that John had been arrested, he withdrew into Galilee. And leaving Nazareth, he went and dwelt in Capernaum by the sea, in the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali, that what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. Here's the quote from Isaiah. The land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, toward the sea, across the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people who sat in darkness have seen a great light. And for those who sat in the region of the shadow of death, light has dawned. From that time, Jesus began to preach, saying, Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. As he walked by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who's called Pitre, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Immediately they left their nets and followed him. And going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, in the boat with Zebedee, their father, mending their nets. And he called them. Immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. And he went about all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every disease and every infirmity among the people. All right, so there's our gospel for this third Sunday in Ordinary Time. There's a lot of important questions to ask about this text. Let's walk through it together. Number one, why does Jesus withdraw into Galilee after John is arrested by Herod? Number two, why does Jesus go and dwell at Capernaum in the land of Zebulun and Naphtali? I mean, you can see this here. This is something that Matthew twice emphasizes. He not only tells you that Jesus dwells in the land of Zebulun and Naphtali, he then quotes a prophecy from Isaiah that speak about these territories. But what does this mean? I mean, for most of us, let's be honest here. When you read those words, Zebulun and Naphtali, do they have any meaning to you whatsoever? Or do you just blow by them? Yeah, okay, land of Zebulun and Naphtali, let's move on. Well, why is Matthew emphasizing it? Who were Zebulun and Naphtali? And why is it so important that Jesus start his ministry there and not elsewhere? Third question, why does Jesus then begin to preach about the coming of the kingdom of heaven? What would that have meant in a first century Jewish context? And then finally, fourth, why does Jesus begin to call the 12 apostles? We see here the account of Peter, Andrew, James, and John, the first four of the 12 to be called. What's the significance of his calling apostles? So let's walk through each one of those together. Number one, after John's arrest, Jesus withdraws into Galilee. Why? Why Capernaum? Why Galilee? Well, if you think for a minute, it's important to keep straight in your mind's eye that Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, and Judea is in the south. That's the southern territory known as Judah. Galilee is in the northern part of the Holy Land, and that's where Nazareth is. That's where Jesus grew up. So in this case, John the Baptist was doing his ministry in the south, in Judea, and that's where he was arrested, and that's where he was executed, and that's where he was put to death by Herod. So Jesus here goes from the south in Judea, and up into Galilee. He withdraws into Galilee. Why does he go there? Well, on the one hand, just on a practical level, Judea is dangerous now, right? John has just been beheaded as a prophet, and Jesus, if he were to begin ministry there, would face some of the similar dangers from the king and from authorities. So it's practically speaking very wise decision to get out of Judea, which is hotbed for this kind of political turmoil, and move into a safer, quieter territory up in the north in Galilee. But that's not why Matthew says Jesus goes up to the land of Galilee. Matthew says that Jesus does it in order to fulfill a prophecy, that he goes to Capernaum, to the land of Zebulun and Naphtali, so that the words of the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. Okay, and then he gives you the quote from Isaiah that I read. Now, for many of us Christians reading in the 21st century, that prophecy doesn't mean that much. But for a first century Jew, this would have been absolutely critical. So for those of you who have the handouts, you can follow along. I've given you a little chart on the handout of key moments in the history of Israel. For those of you who don't, I'll try to hit the high points here. So in ancient Jewish history, according to the Bible, around 1000 BC, so 1,000 years before Jesus comes onto the scene, God promises King David that his kingdom, which is 12 tribes of Israel, right, the 12 sons of Jacob and their descendants, that those 12 tribes as a kingdom will last forever. God promises David that in 1000 BC in the book of Samuel, 2 Samuel chapter 7. However, by 922 BC, after the death of Solomon, the 12 tribes split into two different kingdoms. The 10 tribes of the north become the kingdom of Israel, and then the 2 tribes in the south become the kingdom of Judah. And these two kingdoms are at war with one another, they're in strife with one another, they're divided from one another. And that's how they continued for a couple of hundred years until something absolutely momentous took place. It's sometimes forgotten by Christians, but no Jew would have forgotten it. In 722 BC, so about 700 years before Christ, the Assyrian exile happened. What was the Assyrian exile? The Assyrian Empire at the time in the 8th century BC was extremely powerful, and they came into the northern part of the Holy Land and they decimated it. And they took those 10 northern tribes, the northern kingdom of Israel, they destroyed them, they killed them, and what remained of them, they took into exile. And they scattered them amongst the pagan peoples of the surrounding world. So this was called the Assyrian exile of the 10 northern tribes. In 722 BC, in the Assyrian exile, the majority of the people of God, the majority of the sons of Jacob, the tribes of Israel, were wiped off the face of the map. They were wiped out of they were driven out of the Holy Land and no more. Their descendants were, they had a few remnants here and there, but their tribal land, their tribal territory was now taken over by pagans. All right, that happened in 722 BC. Now, guess what were the first 2 tribes to go into exile in the Assyrian exile? It was the tribes of Zebulun and Naphtali. In other words, the territory of Galilee is where that exile began, where the overthrow of the 12 tribes started. And that's where Jesus is going to begin his public ministry. According to the book of Kings, 2 Kings chapter 15 to 17 says that the first tribes to go in exile were Zebulun and Naphtali. So when Jesus begins his public ministry, what does he do? He beelines it for Galilee and for Capernaum because he is going to begin undoing the exile of the 12 tribes by beginning his ministry precisely where the first exile started. He is going to begin gathering around himself the 12 disciples in order to build up a new Israel precisely where the old Israel was devastated, precisely where the old Israel was scattered to the 4 winds. So that's what Matthew means when he says, now with all that history in mind, listen to the words again. Leaving Nazareth, he went and dwelt in Capernaum by the sea in the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali, that what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. The land of Zebulun, the land of Naphtali toward the sea, across the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles, the people who sat in darkness has seen a great light. Those who sat in the region of the shadow of death, light has dawned. And notice, if you have any doubts that that's what Jesus is doing, what does he begin to preach? Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Any first century Jew who would have heard the language of the kingdom would have always known that the kingdom meant all 12 tribes. The kingdom of David was all 12 tribes. The kingdom of Solomon was all 12 tribes. So if Jesus is coming proclaiming the kingdom, he means the restoration of Israel. He means the ingathering of the tribes. He doesn't just mean the salvation of the southern tribes, the Judah and Benjamin, the Jews. He means the ingathering of the lost tribes of Israel. And if you had any doubt that that's what he meant, look at the last part of the gospel text. What does he begin doing? Calling the first 4 of the 12 disciples. So any first century Jew When they would have seen Jesus with 12 disciples around him, that he called the 12, as if they were, this unique appointed body of followers, would have recognized that he was making a messianic move, that he was talking about regathering the 12 tribes. But they also would have been able to tell him, that's a nice idea, but there's a problem. You know as well as I do that 10 of those 12 tribes have been scattered to the four winds. You know as well as I do that 10 of those 12 tribes are lost among the Gentiles. So how are you going to gather them all back? How are you going to reconstitute the kingdom of David? How are you going to bring about this kingdom? Well, as you'll see as we move through the gospel, the answer is real simple. If you want to get the lost tribes of Israel, you got to go get the Gentiles, because that's where they are, scattered among the nations, right? So what Jesus is going to do is he's going to begin with the Jews and then move out to the Gentiles and gather around himself a new Israel to fulfill the prophecies of the Old Covenant.